a good man. That man's me. Oh, yeah.
All right. So it's May 12th. Welcome to Let's Talk Native on the LTN Radio Network. This program breaks all the rules for Native radio. No buffalo speeches, no mystic healing, no special Indian prayers. We tackle real issues facing Native people with a look back at our glorious and our grave history, a tough look at where we're at now, and a look forward to our ongoing battles for sovereignty and autonomy. Let's Talk Native is produced in association with Iroquois Promotions on the LTN Radio Network, streaming live from the Cattaraugus territory of the Seneca Nation and rebroadcast on great stations like the Gway, CKWE in Tandanaga, and carried on networks like Netroots Radio, Real People's Media, and Indigenous Resistance Radio. I'm John Kane. I'm your host and producer, and of course we're joined by Matt Hill on the board, as always, lending his support to what we do here on a weekly, well, actually twice a week now, basis. Thank you, Matt. Our studio engineer is Kelly McMillan, and she's the one who helped put us all this equipment together for us and keeps us running. And of course, I've got in studio, off camera, off mic, I've got Jake Proud, who is shooting some video and actually helping us produce another video version of what we're doing here, something that we're putting up on our own YouTube channel, and that YouTube channel will feature more and more features as we go forward. But for now, it's mostly the show, and Jake Proud is producing that stuff for us. Hey, the opening song was Murray Porter, and That Man Was Me. And of course, we always love playing Murray's music. It is he's a testament to not only the talent but the creativity that exists amongst our own people. Look, I got a show planned. I didn't have one planned an hour ago, but I have one planned now. Ross John is joining us here in studio, and of course it's always great. Let me move my boom a little bit so I'm not covering.
Believe it or not, you're hiding his face with that thing.
Yeah, I'm trying to adjust it a little bit. It takes usually quite a bit to block Ross's head, but
they call it forced perspective on that one.
I think we got it here. All right. Ross John is joining us in studio. I know, Ross, you've been busy. A lot of stuff going on. I've been talking a lot about Seneca Nation over the last several weeks with the revenue issue associated with revenue sharing and some of that other stuff. But what I wanted to talk about today, and I posted it kind of on a preview here. I want to talk about our own movement, if you will, towards political correctness, and kind of correcting some of our own use of language and imagery and our relationship to the non-native community around us and that kind of stuff. So, I mean, among the things that come to mind, and I screened one of the films about the Oka crisis in New York a couple of weeks ago. It was Ganazadage, 270 Years of Resistance, and I plan to screen Acts of Defiance, which is another film about the Oka crisis and Mohawk territory in general. And looking at those films, and I'm going to screen that one at the end of the month on May 31st at the Brooklyn Commons in New York. But as I watch these films, realize that it's 1990. So it's a little bit ago, but there's still so much imagery that I see that is almost disturbing. Not just the occasional Washington Redskins cap or shirt that you see, but I mean, even in the Oka crisis, where there were a couple of deaths, there was one guy who died of a heart attack after they were stoned by the rioting folks of Chateauguay, and of course he was a veteran, a Canadian veteran, a veteran of the Canadian Armed Forces, and there's all of this Canadian flag imagery, even when Canada is the enemy. I mean, in that situation, the Mohawks were pitted against Quebec and the Canadian government. I mean, Mulroney, the Prime Minister, was really talking a lot of smack about the Mohawks. And even still, when that gentleman died, they show his flag draped coffin with a Canadian flag on it. and as I look through our territories, and it doesn't matter.
He was a veteran himself, right?
Right. He was a veteran himself. And so as I think about that kind of conflict that exists, and Ross, we've talked about things like even the potential of taking the American flag down on our territories. During Standing Rock, at the Standing Rock headquarters, they showed 8 American flags flying with all those flagpoles out in front of the Standing Rock tribal offices. Even while they're in conflict with the United States over the Army Corps of Engineers and the Bureau of Indian Affairs, obviously the state of North Dakota. So even when we're so clearly pitted against the state and the federal government, or the provincial and federal government on the Canadian side, we still have a hard time not either showing reverence or subservience, depending on how you look at it, to the American flag and the Canadian flag. And it begs that question, why is it so difficult? And I understand that, there's years of indoctrination, assimilation. I mean, the other thing that I talk about is our kids. Our kids go to school, and the first thing that they're taught in kindergarten, even sometimes in pre-K, is to pledge allegiance to the American flag. And we don't necessarily confront that issue. And part of it is, whether we don't want to embroil our 5-year-olds in that kind of controversy. I mean, it's hard to say. But we have all of this stuff. The powwows, how many powwows across the country, either side, U.S. or Canada, do they put the label Veterans Powwows on? So the first thing they do is put Native people with a mix of some Native imagery and their Canadian or U.S. Uniforms on, and march them out as a part of the grand entry. American flags, Canadian flags. I mean, so I look at all that stuff, and yeah, I'm troubled by some of it. And although I know we're making progress, as I see some of the stuff, I'm thinking, why are we still there? And I guess that's that's kind of the topic I want to talk about. I want to talk about some of that stuff. Even Onondaga, who by the so-called leadership out there, they try to tout themselves as this bastion of traditionalism, like somehow they have maintained this strict code of longhouse life there. And the reality is, there's a half a dozen churches there.
Right.
There are more churches and longhouses in Onondaga. I mean, it wasn't that long ago that they had an Indian agent, a desk, and an American flag inside their longhouse. I mean, as I talked to guys like Paul Delaron and others who lived there at Onondaga during that period of time, and look, if they didn't have a residential school on their territory the way Cattaraugus does here, but I've seen the pictures of all of their kids with cropped hair, all the girls in little white dresses, all the boys in little matching uniforms. They were as indoctrinated in the schooling of those kids through the 50s, the 40s, 50s, and 60s as any place.
Let me add a little bit, and I hope I don't offend anybody, but, this is Let's Talk Native, and it's, their views, is that I look at the way that I look at it, and I may speak a little bit in economic terms, but sovereignty, people look at it as an asset. And I oftentimes look at it as a liability. A liability because unless you do something with it, unless you move it forward throughout the centuries, it's not worth, it becomes a liability.
Well, it's a liability also because we have to fight for it so often and on such a regular and continuous basis.
And we haven't changed. We're still so used to going by somebody else's rule book. When we have negotiations, and we're going to have some with the state, and every native territory has something going on, is that they fall in. They have the U.S. law, they have the state statutes and laws, they have all this, they have tax codes, they have all these things.
Supreme Court decisions.
Right, and they want to come to agreement with us. Without accepting that we are
equals at the table.
But also different.
Yeah.
And we don't recognize that enough. And we also haven't moved it into this century enough for for it to be viable, to be able to really get our kids to really understand what that means.
Well, and so when we talk about like word choice, I mean, I'm one of those guys who's a stickler to say, let's drop the word Indian, let's drop the word tribe, let's drop all that stuff, because when you look at the way they've wordsmithed these concepts, I mean, you take the word sovereignty. When the United States puts the word tribal in front of it, it means, well, not really sovereignty.
Right.
You know, when they talk about self-determination, they mean tribal self-determination,
Right.
which is not quite self-determination. It is not the international definition of those words. So I think that we have to move to, I mean, when we talk about tribal nations, why aren't we just nations?
Exactly.
You know, why do we allow them to throw that word in front of it? And because, let's face it, that word tribal, I mean, it has this connotation, this primitive connotation to it, like you're a primitive people. So, I mean, if we're going to use that word, why don't we just say primitive people then?
Right.
Instead of tribal people. I mean, in other words, we haven't quite arrived yet to be measured in terms of humanity.
Sure. But we have just as much to offer at the table. You know, I was in a meeting today with one of the state senators and, you know, some of the other political alliances that they brought to the table. And it always starts out like, well, this is, you know, this is the way that we see it. And when you start explaining it's that, but that's not the way we believe it. That's not the way that we understand it. That's not the way that we're going to work it. This is how we see it. And then when you start talking to them, it's like, you know, when you talk about IGRA and the two-part test on, you know, native gaming and those
revenue sharing,
revenue sharing and stuff
really
like
meeting
that.
the standard, right?
Right. And we're saying, you know, we can't pay you a tax. You have to give us something that is equivalent in some way, because it's not taxable, and then be able to sit there with the mayor and, you know, city councilman and all that and say, you can't use this in your general budget.
Let's back up. I mean, the reason when you say we can't pay you a tax, the context of that is that their underlying law,
Right.
the Indian Gaming Regulatory Act, their underlying law prohibits it.
Right.
They say, no, you, the state of New York, you can't tax native gaming.
Right.
It's not even a question. It really isn't just a question of whether we are willing to pay or not.
But
the fact is that, and I guess my point is, anytime we sit down with state or federal officials, they sit down with based on the premise that their underlying law is the dominating law. And that's what everything is going to be based on.
Right.
It isn't based on the fact that, look, we're distinct people.
But
And some of what we not only have to offer, but some of our worldview
Right.
is so different than yours.
And their cultural norms are different than ours. In other words, so when you start talking to city councilmen, state leaders, federal U.S. officials, what you're basically talking about is terms in their economy and their tax code and the way that they value it. Totally different than what we do. And what we ask is for that room to say, that's not how we do it, and that's not how we're going to do it. And we deserve the ability, and we have the right to be able to kind of build it on our own, whether it's off from endowments, whether it's just by
however we
choose to do it. But it's not going to be based on your formula. So when you tell them that it can't be used as a tax, it kind of boggles their mind, because that's what their system is based on.
And I guess to bring it back even farther, we start at a place that is problematic right from the start, because they have trouble acknowledging that our land is not theirs.
Right.
And I know you tried laying that gauntlet down with a group of federal representatives of various law enforcement agencies, a year or so ago.
Mm-hmm.
As I watched all of these films and rewatched them recently, now this Acts of Defiance and Ganazadage 270 Years of Resistance, as I watch these things, as I watch these things, I keep seeing the same scenario layout, which is that the provincial governments and the federal governments in Canada were not acknowledging that Ganawage and Ganazadage were distinct land holdings.
Right.
And that's the problem we have. So when we sit at the table, the first thing that they're not acknowledging, even when we're meeting on our own land, is that we aren't in New York State.
That's just like that old video from Akwesasne, when they're on the black and white video.
On the bridge.
Yeah.
The closing of the bridge.
You know, they got the road blocked, and the policeman comes over there, and he says, well, you guys are going to have to open up the road. You don't understand, you know, the natives are telling him, you don't understand, this is Indian land. Oh, I don't care, you know, that you guys got to open up the road. You can't block the road. So he still
couldn't grasp the idea. Yeah.
You know, he just sees it as his road that goes through there, and he's got to keep it open. They wouldn't even acknowledge that it was native land. They just dismissed them.
Well, and so when you get back into like the gaming issue, and this is where, you know, again, I'm not even talking about what's being imposed upon us. Oftentimes, I'm saying, how are we characterizing some of the stuff?
Right.
And you know, when I listen to some of the language that, and I've realized that sometimes it's our lawyers, it's other people that, you know, that we have hired to try to represent something for us. We're using language that is very, very subservient. That sounds like, you know, we're acknowledging that we're under their, you know, completely under their jurisdiction. I mean, the Cabazon case, for instance. I mean, the Cabazon case, for those who don't know, there were a lot of native territories, including Seneca Nation, that was doing bingo, that were doing what was considered Class 2 gaming. And in fact, there were some territories that were going beyond that Class 2. There were places like here that had slot machines, and I won't mention the fact that Ross John himself did, but no. So there was some of that. But this issue got fought all the way to the Supreme Court with a small native territory in California called the Cabazons. And when it went to the Supreme Court acknowledged that they have the right to do gaming. And of course, the language that they try to say, unless there is an expressed federal prohibition against it, then the native people have the right to do it. I'm thinking, well, what if there is an express? How does an expressed federal prohibition? How does that become a legitimate prohibition? I mean, do they have the right to do that? And see, Cabazon didn't even fully address that. So when they throw language in there that says, unless there's an express prohibition, that they have the right to do it. And of course, there isn't an express prohibition anyplace. So that didn't exist anyhow.
Right. So
when they throw that in there, and then we recite that as if they have the right to have passed a law expressly prohibiting something. And of course, when they pass IGRA, there are many right within native territories that somehow embrace IGRA as if it is the law that allowed us to do gaming, not acknowledging that the Supreme Court didn't grant the Cabazons the right to do gaming. They acknowledged that they had the right to do it. So when you look back at gaming as an act of commerce, it is not something that was given to us by the Supreme Court, not by Congress, and certainly not by states who were willing to sit down and have a compact.
Right.
The reason we can do gaming is because of our underlying and inherent sovereignty, and that gets missed in the conversation.
Right, and you know, as long as, and we're getting to the point, and Native people need to come to the point of saying, okay, how far is a lawyer going to take you? How far is a lobbyist going to take you? Why they're using their playbooks? How far are federal grants and different things like that going to take you? How long are you going to go there? What are you going to do?
How far is paternalism going to take you?
How long? And when are we going to make sovereignty an asset and play by our own rules? We're not talking about things that are off the wall crazy. We're talking about things that make perfect sense.
Yeah, we're not trying to legalize meth labs on our territories.
Right.
I mean, any of the stuff that we're involved in is stuff that is being regulated on the outside by their government. And all we're saying is that we have the right to do these things, and frankly, even things that you may not be totally comfortable with, like hemp farming or whatever else. There may be some things that we do that you don't do. And let's face it, when New York State was allowed through the Indian Gaming Regulatory Act to sit at the table with the Seneca Nation to negotiate a gaming compact for Class 3 gaming, the absurdity of that is that New York State could not do Class 3 gaming.
Right.
I mean, so how is it that New York State could sit at the table with the Seneca Nation and talk about the terms that they would somehow agree with the Seneca Nation, and some would say permit, which I don't, but they would say would permit the Seneca Nation to do something that the state themselves couldn't do.
Right.
I mean, nobody even thinks about the absurdity of that.
Well, we're so geared to just kind of, again, marching to
Yeah,
the dogma
okay,
that they
whatever you're gonna
kind
tell
of put
me.
together.
Yeah.
Because the rule books are out there instead of us saying, wait a minute. You know, let make sense of this. Look, some of the things that we're trying to deal with now are the things that we're trying to be able to help them fix their system because it's got too abusive. You know, their taxing system's gotten too abusive. Their formulas are out of whack. So some of the jurisdictions that are around us, we're basically saying, this is how we're going to help stabilize ourselves, and this is what we're going to offer you in order to stabilize certain things within your own communities. But the only way it's going to be done is that through sovereignty and our ability to play by our own rule book. In what we're talking about, cooperation, we're not talking about laying down a gauntlet. We're talking about, again, a little bit more humanity and common sense in the way that we look at project development, business, social development, and those kinds of things. The way that we place funds, you know, in a way that we relate in counsel with one another.
Well, and it's not even just about part of it. It isn't just about humanity. It's about understanding. Look, you guys haven't gotten everything right.
Yeah.
And in fact, I would argue that when you look at American history, American capitalism, American foreign policy, American, the whole lot of it. There's a lot the United States. I mean, let's face it. They built their economies on the backs of free labor and slavery, out of stolen resources from native territory. So when we say, look, we have a different model, we have a different philosophy, we have a different view. We want to build an economy that's not based on the same things that you have based your economy in, which now has turned into this notion of globalism to such an extent that you have, this whole idea of the global marketplace and the global economy, which I call one of the biggest lies ever told, because when you say something like global economy, you make it sound like it's fair, like the entire globe gets to participate. But let's be honest, in that system, you have a relatively small group of men who control the resources. They go in and they rape the land for natural resources. They rape the people for cheap free labor for centuries.
Right.
They exploit and sell this notion of consumerism that is that is like gluttonous in a way that it's almost unimaginable. The American population represents less than 5% of the world's population, but consume 20% of the world's resources. Right. And that's the system that we're saying, wait a second here. We're affected by that, but that's not what we want to build our lives. And that's not consistent with our 7 generations philosophy and all of that stuff.
They, when you try to explain to them, and it becomes sometimes confrontational, is that you don't have a culture. Well, you do, but your culture is capitalism. Why don't you allow us to be able to build economies, and not just economies, but services and things around the way that our culture norms are geared
our philosophy,
towards, our philosophy,
and then you can learn from us.
Exactly.
I know that sounds threatening to them because they have the whole idea that
because we're at the point now that this globalization and capitalism is the biggest threat to the planet, and
climate change,
and life forms, climate change,
and and it's not just climate change. And I got to mention this, and I've said this before on the show, but I want to say this again. What capitalism is doing to the planet isn't just about climate change. Climate change, suggests again global warming and ozone, but in the meantime, we've got radioactive leakage into the Pacific Ocean because of Fukushima. That's not climate change. That's ocean change.
Right.
We've got water systems that are contaminated. Rivers, the Animas River, because of
Lake
mining.
Ontario is rising like crazy.
But then you look at the contamination of those water supplies. It's not just Flint, Michigan. There are so many places.
Buffalo's dealing with it.
Yep, they're having a lead pipe crisis here.
Sure, they are.
So all of these things that are being, the radioactive migration from the West Valley demonstration project into the Cattaraugus Creek right here.
And there were meetings this week about what's going to happen when they take down the dam.
Yeah, the dam at Kinzua. Because, again, so man's quest to control nature and dam up rivers does not take into account the adverse ecological effects. So when you build a dam, all of the systems that exist naturally to purge the lands and the water and run those contaminants away now are building up in layer after layer after layer in sediment at the foot of that dam. And so you not only done a lot of systems to clean, the same thing I say about the ice boom and my friend Joe Barrett. I mean, the fact that we don't let the systems, the natural systems exist because man thinks they can control them.
This may seem, a little less important, but, we sat down with the mayor of Salamanca the other day, and part of one of the requests was, or the observation was, is like they want to do their ice rink. They already have an ice rink, but they're trying to figure out how to keep it going. The biggest problem is from 86 or 17 is the salt that's saturated into that end.
From road salt.
From road salt.
Yeah.
And
so
that won't freeze
a little hard to
anymore.
freeze. You got so much ice being dumped. And again, that's right now starting to become...
mid-50-degree weather in January, too. That probably doesn't help much.
Yeah. But there's a lot of analysis going into what has been the adverse ecological effect of salting roads to minimize ice. And of course, it isn't just salting roads. We've learned over the last couple of years they've been using some of this fracking waste and this very salty, or what do they call it, brackish brine water from hydrofracking, and they've been spraying it on the roads, even though it's got all kinds of other chemicals in it.
It's got nucleotides in it, and everything else.
Yeah. So when I talk about what the system is, the economic system of the United States, which is essentially the economic system that is being driven around the world, it isn't just about climate change. It's about planet change. It's about ecological degradation of the planet.
Change.
Yeah, and the thing is, you think about logging and deforestation. These things, they affect climate change. But what they affect, even before the sea levels rise and everything else, we feel immediate effects of those things. I mean, whether it's acid rain from coal plants and all kinds of other things, we see the immediate effects of that stuff. So I sometimes, bristle a little bit when I always hear people talk, Sierra Club and 350.org and all these guys talk about climate change. It isn't just about climate change.
Sure.
Hey, look, we're at the bottom of the hour, so let's take a break. I know Matt's got some music queued up, but we'll take a break and we'll come back. I want to talk more about this. I want to explore, where some of the progress is, but where we are still really struggling with the idea of owning our lexicon or language and our references and that kind of stuff. And we'll talk about a little bit more of that when we come back. This is John Kane. This is Let's Talk Native. coming back. Hey, that's a little bit of Frank Wan, and that's Aboriginal. What's that? Oh, yeah. Okay, yeah. Second by you. Oh, there we go. Turn off my computer sound.
Listener,
okay.
please turn your radio down.
Yeah. All right. That's that was Frank Wan with Aboriginal, his instrumental. Look, I want to thank my sponsors. I've got one of them in the room. I want to thank Ross and Holly John and the RJE family of businesses, Eric White and ERW Enterprises, and I want to thank Robert Delamonte and Tuscarora Woodworks. I know we're working on some things together here, and I want to thank him for supporting this program. And as he has, he's actually even sat in with us a few times, filled in with you when I was absent one time. So I also want to thank individuals like Ed Schindler, Tracy Brown, Cynthia Trice, Scott Snyder, Neville Spring, and Sugar Montour, and many others who have helped the program continue to educate, entertain, and inform. We're almost into our 8th year. For the last 7 years. I thank all of you for joining in the fight and doing your part. I also want to thank Unity Stream and Apache Radio Net for providing our streaming. And I also want to thank, of course, the CKWE, the Gway, and Tandanega for doing the simulcasts on our Monday show and the rebroadcasts of both the Monday show and this show, as well as the rebroadcasts on places like Netroots Radio, the Real People's Media, Indigenous Resistance Radio, and all of you who repost and share both the Facebook live feeds and the audio that we put up on SoundCloud. I want to thank all of you for helping us get the word out. You know, we're building something here. You know, what we try to do here is have a conversation that isn't necessarily had elsewhere.
And the audience can participate in that conversation as well.
And the audience can participate, you know, and we do a talkback show in New York, but we also, has the potential. And with our relationship with CKWE, we have a phone system, even when we're not simulcasting like tonight. If somebody wants to participate in the show, you can call 855-967-0463. That's the number to call to participate in the show. And when you call that number, what you're going to be actually calling is CKWE in Tandanega. It's not a long-distance call. It's a toll-free call. But you can call, and our good friends up there, Darren Doreen, will connect us up with Matt here on our board, and you can participate in the conversation. So if you hear something that perhaps makes you bristle a little bit, or maybe something you fully support, and you want to weigh in, then you can do that. You can do that by calling in. You can also do it by adding a comment here on our Facebook live stream. So if you're watching the stream, we are looking at we're watching the comments come in, and if you want to add something to that, even if you want to add it afterwards, because we do repost the video later. If you want to add a comment later, we'll go back and we'll mention something in the next broadcast, or perhaps even answer a specific question right there. This is what we're trying to do. This thing in as many formats, media formats, both the internet radio, we're on terrestrial radio thanks to CKWE. We are on the internet with with both Facebook and Twitter, and of course now we have our own YouTube channel, and it's Let's Talk Native TV. Now I know when you see the video screen or the logo, it says LTN TV, but you're not going to find us on LTN TV. You gotta spell it out, because I know one of the folks, in fact, it was your buddy Brad here who was looking for it. He was looking for it, and he said it doesn't come up. And then you realize you have to spell it all the way out. You got to put Let's Talk Native TV, and that's what we're working on. And we're going to do hopefully some great things with that as we go forward too. So, and that's what we got our good buddy Jake Proud in studio helping us do. And of course, apparently getting some pretty good, interesting camera angles, from what I understand, during the break.
Breaking them in. The stuff's getting broke in is what's going on.
Yeah, right. While our sponsor's in the room, no less, right? Hey, I want to get back on the subject, but a couple things I want to mention. I had the opportunity to have a really good guest join me in New York this week. I had David Grand. David Grand is a best-selling author. He actually wrote the book The Lost City of Z, which is now a major motion picture playing in theaters today. But his latest book is Killers of the Flower Moon. I've talked about it a little bit on the show. It's the story of the Osage murders. In fact, it's called Killers of the Flower Moon, the Osage murders, and the birth of the FBI. It is an incredible story. But, although it's unprecedented in many levels, because it is essentially a serial murder, a mass murder, and a series of murders that is so premeditated that makes it fairly unprecedented. But those murders were based on greed, on racism, on the dehumanization of the Osage people.
and these were murders that were so calculated that people would actually marry into a family, have children with the Osage people, and then kill them. So the white people with their half native, half white children would have the head rights to all of the oil revenue. It's just an incredible thing because it would take years, and the level of complicity that existed with law enforcement, local businesses, churches. I mean, the whole bit. It's an incredible story. I can't impress upon people why it's important, how very important it is to pick this book up. Again, it's Killers of the Flower Moon, the Osage Murders and the Birth of the FBI. If you read this book, and keep in mind, this is the 20th century that this took place. This is the 1920s. This is the birth of the FBI. This is J. Edgar Hoover. I know people are always talking about Comey today, but J. Edgar Hoover was the FBI guy, right? This was actually one of the first cases that he was involved in.
Oh, yeah.
And if you understand what was allowed to happen by the greater society, the colonial powers out there, it gives you a better insight onto why Native people why we are at where we're at. I mean, even as I sit here with some condemnation about our inability to unshackle ourselves from assimilation and indoctrination, it's no wonder. It's no wonder when you think about what our generations went through: residential schools, murders, massacres,
sure,
mass executions. A history where every American hero that is touted in the history books, whether it's from Washington, to Obama, and nobody's really calling Trump a hero, but everybody from Washington to Obama, we have examples about how those presidents, how those Rana de Gaius screwed our people somehow. And oftentimes, did things that caused death and destruction. I mean, Obama is attributed to being this somebody who should have been more understanding about human rights and civil rights and that kind of stuff. But the Cobell suit, where Native people were screwed out of $40 billion worth of their own assets.
And now we're even?
Obama settles at 10 cents on the dollar.
Yeah, that's what I mean.
$4 billion gets settled. And who gets to manage most of that money? The same agency, the Bureau of Indian Affairs.
To right in plain sight, burn documents.
Yeah, I mean, it's the criminal activity that was involved. And so Obama, the hero, he settles that thing 10 cents on the dollar. And what do our people do? They take it. They sign it. And again, it's hard for me to be overly critical of somebody who says, look, we get cheated all the time. If they're going to give me $1,500 and I got to sign off on this, then it's a drop in a bucket compared to what they've taken over the years. At least I got $1,500. So I can't condemn the individuals who signed those settlements. But when you think about what really happened, when I talk about equity, there's no equity in the relationship we have with the United States. And I'll bring it right back to this to the revenue sharing issue here.
Right.
The one thing that I can't. As I talk about this thing, the thing that really gets to me is that in the 14 years that the Seneca Nation, pretty faithfully paid a revenue share to New York State for a concession that they were supposed to have made, which was an exclusivity for all of Western New York. They not only paid a sliding scale percentage of the slot revenue, but they also, what they kept, their percentage of that slot revenue, they reinvested. They not only built the first facility, but they built two more facilities, threw in over $1 billion worth of investment, giving almost $1.5 billion to the state, reinvesting in the region $1 billion, but also reinvesting over $1 billion in their own gaming enterprises, which the state benefited from, because every time they enhanced their gaming experience and added more machines or added more...
That's 25%.
That's 25% of an ever bigger piece of gaming. And the state was getting... So during 14 years, the Seneca Nation actually gave more value to the revenue share in the same period of time that New York State was diminishing the value of the exclusivity. They diminished it first by putting slot parlors in their racetracks. And competing wide open against the Seneca Nation, but also pushing for a referendum so they could finally enter into Class 3 gaming, because they couldn't through most of those years, and then build a casino on the fringe of that exclusivity zone.
Sure.
So when you look over what the state has done with their exclusivity, they made it worth less, while the Seneca Nation was making the revenue share worth
Larger.
more.
Yep.
And to me,
And
John,
and that gets by almost everybody.
and it's amazing to me that so when the Seneca Nation a few years back was in arbitration after saying, look, these slot parlors you put up are just they're carving into our market share. They are a direct violation of the provisions of the gaming compact. And so they escrowed up to $600 million, holding up the payments to the state, offering to do something locally. But the state said, no, you got to pay us, and that's the only way we're going to accept it. Ultimately, they work out a settlement. The state surrenders $200 million of that escrow money, acknowledging for all intents and purposes that they had breached the agreement. But they move forward with the same system, that 25% of the slot drop, with the state having to change things like not calling their slot parlors casinos anymore, doing some other things. They couldn't call them slot machines. They had to go back to calling them VLTs, which, let's face it, they're really slot machines, but they had to call them something else. So there was some concession that they had to make as part of to resolve that conflict. But now, after the thing terms out at 14 years, the state wants to play stupid and say, oh, no, you got to keep paying us. Yeah, sure, the compact's at 14 years, but you still got to keep paying us.
Right.
And that's where we're at today. I mean, so it's amazing to me that when you look at the relationship that we have with both the state and the federal government, although the federal government's not the bad guys here in this one, but the test will be, and this is what we always get hit with, and that's why, again, our view, we have to be stronger in understanding in how we address this thing. What I keep hearing all the time, and I've mentioned on the show a couple of times, is people keep saying, reporters, Tom Precious, other folks in the media keep saying, well, the state may just end up canceling the compact and closing the casino down. No, they're not. They're not. For one thing, they don't have the legal authority to do it. A compact was negotiated. If the state decides not to renew it, there's even in the strictest reading of the IGRA, and let me back up on that too, because when IGRA was passed, what they suggested is that the states and the native governments had to negotiate a compact. They both had to negotiate. And in fact, the states had to. They couldn't refuse to, because in the original drafting of IGRA,
Sure.
the native territories could sue the state if they refused to negotiate, if they refused to have good faith negotiations. Florida argued that and said, well, that violates, I think, the 13th Amendment or 11th Amendment of the Constitution. And they were able to sever that part of the IGRA away. But so now you're left with a gaming regulatory act that suggests the native people have to come to the table, but the state doesn't. Well, that doesn't quite work out. Well, there's problems, again, with equity in that. But when you look at the Seneca deal, if Cuomo tried to walk away, not only from the 7 years remaining of the existing compact, but even 7 years down the road, if whoever's the governor of the state of New York says, we're not going to renew this compact, your gaming is done. No, it isn't. And this is what we have to become more diligent and more focused on asserting that right, that the state does not have the right to shut down our gaming, or frankly, it doesn't have a right to interfere with our tobacco trade, with our fuel sales, or anything else that we're involved in. And these are areas that, frankly, the lawyers are somewhat hesitant to get into. Sure. And the argument was, if the state doesn't negotiate a compact, does the federal government have to come in and shut the Seneca gaming down? And that's not true either, because you have to go back to the original thing that we talked about here.
Look,
gaming is possible because of sovereignty, not because of federal.
But the states aren't really invited to the table for any revenue unless they have concessions.
Well, and even now that this term is ended, and that that term has expired, it's sunset. This is one of the things that a lot of the reporters were saying, was that the Seneca Nation has to now negotiate with the state. No, you don't.
Look,
and in fact, the offer that you guys put out there originally was for the local municipalities to come to the table. I never heard you guys put the offer for Cuomo to come to the table. I heard he was interested in sitting at the table, and the language that he keeps using is, "Oh yeah, we're going to resolve this conflict." I haven't heard anybody from the Seneca Nation say, oh yeah, we're going to resolve this with the state. I haven't heard that yet, unless you're going to tell me different.
No, we're not. It's, they keep on wanting to talk about negotiations. It's like, no, we want to sit down to be able to kind of explain our position. Look, again, we've been meeting with certain people, senators and congressmen and, statewide, federal, and this and
But
that.
you've also been meeting with community leaders as well.
But just as important, community leaders. The thing that gets by all of them, and a number of them, a high percentage of them are attorneys, is that they didn't know any of this. And then they sit back and they said, you need to explain this to more people. Because they never really read they were just reading where the state's compact and where it thought its rights were, instead of said, no, this goes all the way back to concessions and the way that a state doesn't have the ability to tax. They know nothing about the 2-point test that has to be
that the Interior Department laid
sure.
out, and they're the arbitrator of this.
Right.
And they said, look,
And
it has to be both substantial and quantifiable what you're conceding
Right.
for that revenue share.
Because what they basically sit back and until you tell them that and they understand that, they're still saying it's owed. And then all of a sudden they say, oh, crap, it's not owed. How are we going to work this out? And
Well,
it's
let's be clear.
no.
There's no question that the state has treated that revenue like it was a tax.
Sure.
They've budgeted it like it was a tax. They've projected it like it was a tax. They've treated the entire revenue share agreement with the Seneca Nation as if it's an entitlement to them, that it's owed to them, that it's obligated. I mean, we heard it over and over again. Oh, the Senecas owe us. The Senecas have to pay us. I mean, there's nothing that says, well. They wouldn't even refer to it as monies that the Senecas were sharing with us. They
Right.
said, no, it's monies that they are mandated. I mean, that's what they were. They treated it like a tax. There's no denying it.
Sure. And we're tearing it all apart. And honestly, a lot of it is because we've been able to kind of get control of the attorneys and say, no, this is the way that we're going to look at it.
Well, the other thing is the provisions of a conflict within the compact suggest that the conflict resolution should go to arbitration. This isn't really a conflict of the compact.
No.
And one of the things that Matt and I've talked about here on the show, look, if the state wants to go into arbitration, well, there's a couple of things that they could arbitrate. How about they go into arbitration to see how that 2-point test was met?
Right.
Did the state get paid too much money? So maybe the arbitration isn't about what the state thinks they have coming. Well, how about you go into arbitration to resolve what the state got paid? Because after $1.5 billion for an exclusivity that wasn't worth that, maybe the state's got to pay some money back to the Seneca Nation.
That's what.
If that's what they want to really want to push as arbitration.
That's our whole thought process in it. Arbitration. That's what we want to arbitrate. I want to go a little bit back to the Osage situation. Is that it's not that it's not just that they allowed it. When you talk about the federal government and the FBI
locals,
and everybody else, that's who they are, and we can't lose that distinction. That's who they are, and it's been going on before the Osage, after Osage, it's going on today. That's part of capitalism. That's part of their doctrine of discovery. That's all those things that kind of roll.
Well, let
from
me put a finer point on that.
But
because
John, they're all over the world.
Yeah.
Native people are being subjected to this all over the place as it continues here on this continent.
Well, and what I wanted to mention is that the Osage, once it was acknowledged that they had this wealth coming in from oil,
Sure.
the federal government says, you're not capable of managing your money.
Exactly.
So they assigned the Osage guardians, and especially if they were full blood. If they were mixed blood, so as soon as they were mixed blood, they said, well, you seem to have reached a level of humanity, I guess, that you can manage. But no, you over here, it didn't matter if they were a chief or what they were amongst their own people. They said, no, we're not going to allow you to manage your own money. So their minders, if you will, their custodians, would have to approve even their most basic purchases, whether they could buy a car, whether they could buy a house. So this whole idea of this trust relationship that people, and presidents today, Obama was always talking about this trust relationship. Look, it wasn't about trust as a virtue. It was about trust as in
Keeping an eye on 'em.
trusteeship. It was about, no, we are holding your stuff for you, your lands, your resources. And the Osage, part of what allowed them to be screwed over so bad was the fact that they weren't being allowed by the federal government to manage their own dollars.
Right.
Even as they were in 1920, they were considered the wealthiest people in the world. Can you believe that? In the 1920s, the Osage, because of the oil revenue and the relatively small population that they represented, they were not just the wealthiest people as a people in the United States, but they were the wealthiest people in the world. And white people had crosshairs on them. And, much of that story has been retold over. What do you think John D. Rockefeller did?
Right.
I mean, when he saw, the pickings that could be gotten out of Indian country, when he saw he didn't have to murder people the way the folks in
You see it in
Osage.
Alaska, you see it in Canada,
Hawaii,
you see it in Hawaii, you
Puerto
see it-
Rico,
yeah,
everywhere.
every
Yep,
place.
South America.
Warner Brothers cartoons, or was that one Warner Brothers cartoon where they had the little Indian Joe with the oil wells? And
Oh yeah. No, it's
my favorite.
It's incredible. It's incredible. But that's why, as we sit at the table now, and frankly, we seem to be able to read things like the compact better than they can. Now we can take a stronger position because, look, we understand your language. We understand your philosophy. We understand your character and the lack of character. So when you want to sit at the table, whether you're William Hochul coming down here as the U.S. attorney, wants to get all arrogant sitting in Seneca territory and takes offense because he said, look, we don't share we don't view your history the same way you do.
Should require them to have an assistant or representative from our side.
Yeah, in order to sit at the table, we need to provide you a guardian because you obviously don't know how to conduct yourself among real human beings. And I think that's a valid point can be made from that. And of course, now you look at this administration. And now the entire world is like laughing at the United States. But you know what? This guy is no more buffoon than the 44 before him as far as Native people are concerned.
Sure, it's been going the same direction. Look, I think the thing as Native people, there's a couple of things that we had to consider, and it really has to do with, the way we understand things, is that, first of all, we know how this is going to end. Now, we can come out of our shells and have discussions in mainline media and other places to see if we can help educate and point people out on where it's going. On the same end is the things that we're trying to do here in Seneca is that, we're trying to play the economic game. But at the same time, a lot of it is so that we can be sustainable.
Yeah.
So that we can start feeding ourselves, so that we don't get pulled along with this train going off a cliff here.
Exactly.
And because this is where it's going. And anybody that's thinking different is lying to themselves. So we're trying to prepare. And again, we say it over and over. I heard it. Not saying that the world's going to end or everybody's going to, perish.
It's not Armageddon necessarily,
Yeah.
but there is some change coming.
There is.
And drastic change.
Look, John, and it's already happening. There's people that are dying of starvation and different ailments to this day. And it's spreading.
There's well-fed people dying of starvation.
Sure.
I mean, because that's what we've done to the food supply. So when we talk about food sovereignty, it's not just about having food. It's about us returning to food that suits our needs.
Look at how large of a population are overweight. I mean, myself included.
all of us. I mean, none of us are skinny in this room.
Just look at a room. But you go to the store, man, you just see people buzzing around in these little carts with, tons of pop hanging off the sides of their carts. I mean, just think of how much of that population in a modern world that we live in now. That's Americana. That's Americana nowadays. There's TV shows dedicated to that. My 600-pound life. That's a common thing.
Yeah.
They got fat kids in the body now that they never had before. Why? Because of McDonald's and fast food, and they are now their favorite foods.
Yeah.
But again, it's up to us to either have the strength. So, like I said, is our sovereignty going to be a liability? Or are we going to make it an asset? Are we going to use it to empower ourselves to be able to run our own food systems and our own community relationship and figure out how we're going to take care of the people that we can, that that we're responsible for, or we're related to, and that we can have like minds with, and also we're putting a hand out there. They may slap it away. But we have a foundation of understanding how this is going to end.
Well, you know,
And that's what we really need
Can
to
I
be
make a
able to tell
suggestion
people.
to that? That's an issue that could be brought up at the removing the dust meeting coming up this Saturday. The next Saturday, I
Next
should
Saturday,
say,
yeah.
the 20th. That's something that can be discussed, and that's impacting of a lot of people there.
Yeah.
So I mean,
You know, we talk about, you know, and I've talked
Do it
about
as a collective.
decolonization, but I'm going to coin a new phrase right tonight. It's called decapitalization. At some point, we've got to figure out whether we're going to begin to, and I'm not saying this is an all or nothing proposition, whether you're talking about decolonization or my new word, just invented it. Sound like Trump, right?
Decapitalization.
what
Decapitalization.
happened to re-indigenizing?
Well, that's another one. But I mean, part of it is claiming identity.
You claimed that one
But
before.
even as you claim identity, we have to understand that we have to somehow untangle ourselves from the mess that we have gotten, that we've been embroiled in intentionally through indoctrination, assimilation, genocide. So we have to start untangling ourselves from the systems of oppression. And there is no greater system of oppression in the world than capitalization today.
Yeah.
Yep. And that's the greatest threat to the planet.
I believe that's the truth.
Right.
I believe that's the truth. Look, we're just about out of time. I am not in New York this week, but I think I'm going to do a show. I'm going to do a Let's Talk show. I'm not exactly sure how I'm going to handle it all, but I'm going to on Thursday from 10 till noon. If you normally tune me in from my New York show on WBA.org. Last week I did an experiment. It's the first time that I actually broadcasted Let's Talk with John Kane on WBA on my Unity Stream network. So Thursday from 10 till noon, I'm going to come in here. I'm going to do a show on Thursday from 10 till noon. Even though I'm preempted in New York because they're doing a fund drive, I'm going to do a show because there's too much content not to talk about. So not only will I be back here Monday, but to do this show, but I'm going to do my version of my New York show, Let's Talk, on the Unity Stream network on Thursday as well. So look for it, and by all means, go out and check out this book. See what you get. I'll tell you, if David Grand's last book, The Lost City of Z, was made into a major motion picture. This book is incredible. Check it out. Killers of the Flower Moon. You want to see what greed, racism, and dehumanization looks like? You're going to see it right there. And that was in the 20th century, 1920s. All right, that's it. Thanks, Ross, for coming in. Thank you, Jake. Thank you, Matt.
Yeah.
We'll see you in a few days. Yowie.